So this video is going to be a little bit different format than some of the other ones. I know my last video I did on nuclear war simulator, it involved an India and Pakistan conflict. And somebody mentioned about, on the Pakistan side, China getting involved. And it's a very real possibility. Pakistan and China's pretty close out, strategic partners in some ways, but also the fact that India wouldn't risk using all of their nuclear forces with China still in the mix. So we're going to run this a couple times, but I think what we're looking at is, strategically speaking, casualty-wise. And so in this one, I'm going to give India the benefit of the doubt that India is going to launch first. Now, I know China has a no first use policy, at least that's what they say. I don't know off the top of my head with India's if they have a stated policy or not. But in this particular one, they're going to divide their forces and they're going to make a strike at both China and Pakistan. And then we're going to look and see what kind of retaliation casualties we would see. They are purposely trying to hit military installations to try to reduce the ability for both countries to be able to strike back. So I'm going to bear with this here a little bit. And the way I'm trying to run it is about a 15-minute window before a response from the other side. So right around 15 minutes in, give or take a little bit of time, at that point, the other two nations are going to respond. And not in every one scenario I run through is it going to be where both Pakistan and China will be involved, but quite a few of them will. So we're going to run this now with China. And so China is going to kind of have a conservative response. So they don't want to deploy their entire strategic rocket force. They're going to go 35%. But the focus is going to be on military targets to reduce any possible follow-on strikes by India. They see they're launching, so they're going to launch back at their sites. So now Pakistan, on the other hand, is going to utilize 70% of their nuclear forces. Pakistan is going to rightly decide that they probably have much less of a risk of an engagement with the United States or Russia, whereas China has both some partnerships and obviously geopolitical rivalries there. So looking at casualty-wise, it's still overwhelmingly weighted towards India, and that's largely due to the fact that the Chinese strategic rocket force is so much higher. Their estimated warheads in 2023 by the DoD is about 500. And they have more longer range warheads to strike India than India would to strike some portions of China. So kind of flip through here. Not a lot to affect the other countries, but we're going to run through a little bit different this time now, kind of reset everything. And, excuse me. And this time, India is going to make a better go at taking out China's strategic rocket forces. And so, on the flip side, China's still going to focus right around 45% this time. And again, it's going to be striking back at military targets. So they would have suffered some losses of the strategic rocket forces, and also they're not utilizing a full thing back. And this is not involving Pakistan at this point. This is simply an India-China thing. And you see here, China, 305,000 casualties, India at 20.2 million. And the higher casualty rate really being around about the Chinese having that larger strategic force and larger yield weapons. So when I did the other video, and I'll flash it up here, but the total yield of the Indian stockpile of nuclear weapons, and for that matter Pakistan, quite a bit lower. One Chinese warhead will be able to match their entire strategic force. More theater level force, not for that matter. I use strategic when it comes to India. So this time they're going to go a little differently. So this time India is going to preemptively do a strike on civilian targets. And so this time is simply to try to cause more casualties that compared to casualties in return. So we'll see here. Again, you're seeing some limitations on their longer range weapons. Clearly, China's population is positioned further away, population centers, from India. It's much more along the east coast than it is on the west, and the border they share. So again, it comes back to Chinese weapons are better able to hit Indian population centers and targets than Indian weapons are to Chinese. This time we're going to increase the response, and they're going to be more targeted towards civilian casualties. But we're still not going to go all in. But we are going to weight more towards civilian, as they felt like they were targeted more at civilian centers than military targets. And you see that India did launch another weapon, but you can just see even from the markers that the sheer number of warheads able to target population centers in India is much higher. So let's see here. 49.6 million. Now, the Chinese casualties targeting population centers was higher than some of the other ones at 812,000, but obviously still weighted much heavier towards the India side. So let's run this again. Now they're going to go 100% of their force, 100% civilian. They're just going all in. Let's cause as many casualties as we can before the response comes. And I think what you're going to see almost again and again in this, there's no real good scenario, especially if it involves both Pakistan and China or just China, that India would use nuclear level weapons, that they're going to come out on the short end of the stick, just with disparity of force and disparity of range. China this time is going back to 60% of their forces with a 50-50 split. And you already see an inbound, the sheer number of warheads again. This is at a higher percentage too. The sheer number of warheads is just much greater. Let's look at the casualties here. Come on. It's doing its little calculations. The extra CPU power hopefully helping out here. 73.8 million losses. Now, there was 3.7 million on China. It's one of the highest ones because of the greater targeting of civilian sites versus military sites. So now we're going back to targeting military centers. And now China is making a first strike against India. Just trying to see if kind of a reversal of fortune. Can China decapitate India's military response? So I gave it a kind of that 15-minute window, and now India is going to respond with what military or nuclear forces they have left. So 100%. And nothing. Their nuclear forces were destroyed. They didn't have a chance to deploy. So in this scenario, with the Chinese decapitation strike, they were able to cause 25 million losses, plus a significant loss in Nepal. And they were able to effectively neutralize any retaliation by India. Now, this is a scenario where India's nuclear forces are not prepared. We're going to just go. So for fun, let's say China decides to use the rest of its forces against the United States. How many casualties can they cause in the United States? And this is just to give you a sense of scale of the Chinese nuclear strategic forces versus India. So even with them already deployed their amount of weapons, they were still able to make several strikes against the United States there. So we're calculating the casualties here. And 25 million India, 11.5 million in the United States. So China still possesses the capabilities to cause a significant amount of casualties in the United States. Now we're going to go on the flip side. And the United States is going to go all in with what forces they have, and they're going to go 100%. Not 100% in. They're going 65%. So they're going to retain some level for Russia, but 100% civilian targets. And this is to give you an idea of the scale of the United States strategic nuclear forces, even with a strike by China. Even just utilizing 65% of our force. Let's give it time to run the casualties here. And this is kind of getting a little off topic, but I just want to give a sense of scale from India for these other countries. 136.2 million. So just to give you an idea, even with the expanded amount of Chinese nuclear forces that's happened in recent years, still a huge difference. And so wanted to zero in a little bit, and let's look at a little more specific to India and Pakistan. So what I wanted to see was now, would it be prudent for India to try to do a first strike, decapitation strike against Pakistan? They clearly were unable to do it against China. Any scenario we run involving China, India comes out very much on the short end of the stick, and rightly so. And they would know this. They would know that they would never want to go to a nuclear level. So I'm running this to give a certain amount of time again until Pakistan can respond. This is time for sensors to go off, warnings to go off, and then leaders to be notified and make a decision. Yes, strike back. And so 15 minutes is actually very generous, I think, because that's a lot to happen and a lot of decisions to make. But let's say that their command and control is very efficient. And so you see they're starting to launch. I'm speeding up time here, not running one for one, because you'd be falling asleep at this point. Let's go. So, still letting some time passes. Now we're seeing some touchdowns already happening. So definitely, Pakistan's not under any delusions now. They're in a full go attack. At this point, another 2 minutes to take it to the 15 minutes. Okay. Order's been given, and the first buttons are being pushed. So Pakistan is now going to strike back with as much as they have. At this point, they've already been targeted. And I would feel under this type of scenario, they would make a decision. India's already launched its weapons. Why target its military at this point? Target civilian centers and retaliate to cause as much damage as possible in return from their population. So how effective is this? We have to ask. So if we look at it, because Pakistan was still able to have enough nuclear forces to make strike backs, so we'll run the casualties here. So, okay, we're looking at 2.9 million for Pakistan, but still 1.3 million for India. Of course, India having a much larger population, they'll be able to absorb those casualties greater. But the real question is, if they didn't do the first strike, what would the casualties look like? So we're going to run through again. This time we're going to allow Pakistan to do 100% civilian with 100% of their forces. How much did India reduce their losses by doing that first decapitation strike? Let's look at the difference, the delta here. $6.3 million. So they reduced their casualties by right around 5 million people. So in this scenario, yes, a decapitation strike was effective in greatly reducing their losses. Obviously, 1.3 million is still nothing to shake your head at. It's still a significant amount of losses, but it is reduced from what they would suffer if they had not made that decapitation strike. Again, there's no scenario where the losses aren't in the millions and sometimes higher. So even if it did not involve China, there's no win-win. There's only losing a little bit less. But I say that, but the idea that nuclear war isn't winnable depends on how you define the metrics. I shouldn't say there's no win. It's just losing less. But clearly in war, you always have losses. And the goal of war is really, multifaceted, but one of which is going to be to inflict more losses than you suffer. as well as it could be key resources, territory, removing an opponent from power, a lot of different things. But if you go off the one metric of killing more of them than they kill of us, then yes, a India first decapitation strike against their Pakistan nuclear forces is effective at greatly reducing the follow-on casualties. On the flip side, there is no effective deterrent against Chinese nuclear forces. Every which way you run the scenario, without China ever deploying 100% of their forces, China is still able to inflict much far greater casualties on India than India would China. A lot of that has to do with just distance and range of forces. So yes, number of warheads, Chinese number of warheads are higher than India's number of warheads. Their yields are greater and their range is greater. There's no way you're going to be able to overcome that. Even with first strikes, even if China was completely caught off guard. And you saw the other effect of, even after deploying their forces, they were still able to cause some significant casualties against the United States with the remaining forces. And even after that, just to give you an idea how it scales. China is building up its nuclear forces. DOD's last report believes by 2030 they'll have 1,000 warheads. Right now, they're written at about 500 based on our intelligence. There's some question over the quality and some concerns over the corruption and stuff. And I will leave that to another video to even delve into that stuff. But they are definitely increasing their number of warheads, their number of silos, and they believe that their current minimal deterrence strategic forces are not enough to give the United States pause, and they really want to beef it up to. Well, I'm not going to. I'll backtrack on that, and I'll just leave it at to speculate that it sounds like they want to present a greater deterrence to the United States, which is, you can take it or leave it. But even with their minimal deterrence, number of warheads and strategic forces, it's still enough that we would have significant casualties. So, but they feel that it's not enough to potentially deter military action by the United States. So we'll cover that in another video. But this one to cover some strategic options available to India, what would happen if they employed certain options, and which were effective and which were ineffective. So enjoy. Thank you, and have a great night.